At 10 years old, I had to uproot myself entirely. I had to radically change my environment and adapt to new surroundings over 4 times. I bet several of you can relate. For those of you that can't, I want you to imagine moving to a different continent across the world. The only information you know about your new home comes from TV, and although you don't know it yet, your new home lives in a completely different way than you do. They eat different food than you do, they speak a different language, they process information differently than what you've ever been accustomed to. Keep in mind that there's hundreds of countries around the world, each with their own individual customs and ideologies. I can imagine how you'd feel. Out of place, homesick, disoriented. That feeling is what I'm here to talk to you about today. The feeling of being adrift in unfamiliarity is known as culture shock. For those of you who aren't aware, culture shock is a feeling of unfamiliarity or disorientation that comes with experiencing a different culture. Growing up in Venezuela, I became accustomed to a certain way of life. I, of course, got used to having an arepa for breakfast every day, watching my cartoons with a Latin American accent, and because Venezuela is a politically unstable country, to say the least, I grew accustomed to a certain way of life where I would never have to be away from home, in case of sudden protests or a national emergency. The giant fortifying walls around my home are no different to the houses next to mine or the houses in my friends' neighborhoods. Life moves so quickly, I barely even realized my family and I were moving until we reached the Miami International Airport. Now, the theme for this year's TED Talks is rethinking something. All I've ever seen about culture shock has only shown a negative perspective of it. I hope that by the time I finish my talk today, you can understand that shocking our set ideals and lifestyles can lead to a beautiful and empowering way of understanding one another better. Moving to a different country, or in my case, moving from South America to North America, was a very humbling experience. I wasn't immediately affected by this huge change in my life. It was more the details that made up my experience with culture shock. Sociology and psychological research shows that people deal with culture shock in 4 phases, in which their emotional state changes and develops over the course of time dealing with a different culture. First comes the honeymoon phase. I personally remember being amazed by American consumerism. Malls, the airport, shoe stores, even grocery stores were bright and calling your name. Anything and everything you could ever need was a 10-minute drive to your closest Target or Walgreens. Then comes the next phase, anxiety. The fear of having to rebuild my life and realizing that the friends and family I'd left behind in Venezuela were not something I'd ever see again was one of the strongest emotional obstacles I've had to face in my lifetime. In order for us to be happy, there must be equilibrium in our lives. Despite how much I missed my home country, I realized that I had begun to relearn my lifestyle and how I interacted with others. This is the 3rd step in the process, adjustment. I realized I'd begun to adjust to American lifestyle when I learned to eventually greet a friend or a family friend with a simple hello, while in Venezuela I was accustomed to greeting anyone with a hug and a kiss on each cheek. Finally comes acceptance. After about a year of living in the States, I had not only been accustomed to American lifestyle, I had internalized it. It was harder for my parents to adapt because, of course, it's always easier for kids, and I was already fluent in English while they had to learn it. Luckily for us, Miami already has a mild Latin influence, so I never had to look too far to find friends that could relish in the memories that I had left behind in South America. Now, what does this have to do with anything? Why do my experiences with culture shock affect anyone in this room? Well, as someone attending an international school, it's challenging to find someone that hasn't experienced the same things that I have with culture shock. It's challenging to find someone that hasn't felt that same sense of desperation and hopelessness that they would feel adapting to a different culture. I think it's important to send a message to everyone that's trying to adapt to a new culture, as so many others have, to remember that it is possible. Despite the beliefs of those around us, change is possible. We're not stuck in any one way of life or any one culture. You in everyday life can try to find experiences that will allow you to become a more adaptable person in a matter of months. You could go to a local homeless shelter, for example, or you could even research new cultures from the comfort of your own home. You don't have to give up your own lifestyle in order to adapt to new cultures. If anything, merging lifestyles from different cultures allows us all to become a more tolerable and accepting community. So, while culture shock is always painted in a negative light, I think it's time to change that and start to envelop ourselves in experiences that allow us to become a more accepting and tolerant community as a whole. While I now have a hybrid of Spanish, American, and Venezuelan culture influencing how I live my life, I will always have an arepa for breakfast. And I'm so excited to see how I'm going to change as I begin to experience new cultures and learn to appreciate them that much more. Thank you.